Chapter 9, Part 2. Miss Davidson again began the work of securing in various ways small contributions for the new building from the white and colored people in and near Tuskegee. I think I never saw a community of people so happy over anything as were the colored people over the prospect of this new building. One day, when we were holding a meeting to secure funds for its erection, an old antebellum colored man came a distance of 12 miles and brought in his ox cart a large hog. When the meeting was in progress, he rose in the midst of the company and said that he had no money which he could give, but he had raised 2 fine hogs and that he had brought one of them as a contribution toward the expenses of the building. He closed his announcement by saying, "Any nigger that's got any love for his race or any respect for himself will bring a hog to the next meeting." Quite a number of men in the community also volunteered to give several days' work, each toward the erection of the building. After we had secured all the help that we could in Tuskegee, Miss Davidson decided to go north for the purpose of securing additional funds. For weeks she visited individuals and spoke in churches and before Sunday schools and other organizations. She found this work quite trying and often embarrassing. The school was not known, but she was not long in winning her way into the confidence of the best people in the North. The first gift from any Northern person was received from a New York lady whom Miss Davidson met on the boat that was bringing her north. They fell into a conversation, and the Northern lady became so much interested in the effort being made at Tuskegee that before they parted, Miss Davidson was handed a check for $50. For some time before our marriage, and also after it, Miss Davidson kept up the work of securing money in the North and in the South by interesting people by personal visits and through correspondence. At the same time, she kept in close touch with the work at Tuskegee as lady principal and classroom teacher. In addition to this, she worked among the older people in and near Tuskegee and taught a Sunday school class in the town. She was never very strong, but never seemed happy unless she was giving all of her strength to the cause which she loved. Often at night, after spending the day and going from door to door trying to interest persons in the work at Tuskegee, she would be so exhausted that she could not undress herself. A lady upon whom she called in Boston afterward told me that at one time, when Miss Davidson called her to see and send up her card, the lady was detained a little before she could see Miss Davidson, and when she entered the parlor, she found Miss Davidson so exhausted that she had fallen asleep. While putting up our first building, which was named Porter Hall after Mr. A.H. Porter of Brooklyn, NY, who gave a generous sum toward its erection, the need for money became acute. I had given one of our creditors a promise that upon a certain day he should be paid $400. On the morning of that day, we did not have $1. The mail arrived at the school at 10 o'clock, and in this mail there was a check sent by Miss Davidson for exactly $400. I could relate many instances of almost the same character. This $400 was given by 2 ladies in Boston. 2 years later, when the work at Tuskegee had grown considerably, and when we were in the midst of a season when we were so much in need of money that the future looked doubtful and gloomy, the same 2 Boston ladies sent us $6,000. Words cannot describe our surprise or the encouragement that the gift brought to us. Perhaps I might add here that for 14 years these same friends have sent us $6,000 a year. As soon as the plans were drawn for the new building, the students began digging out the earth where the foundations were to be laid, working after the regular classes were over. They had not fully outgrown the idea that it was hardly the proper thing for them to use their hands, since they had come there, as one of them expressed it, to be educated and not to work. Gradually, though, I noted with satisfaction that a sentiment in favor of work was gaining ground. After a few weeks of hard work, the foundations were ready, and a day was appointed for the laying of the cornerstone. When it is considered that the laying of this cornerstone took place in the heart of the South, in the Black Belt, in the center of that part of our country that was most devoted to slavery, that at that time slavery had been abolished only about 16 years, that only 16 years before no Negro could be taught from books without the teacher receiving the condemnation of the law or of public sentiment. When all this is considered, the scene that was witnessed on that spring day at Tuskegee was a remarkable one. I believe there are few places in the world where it could have taken place. The principal address was delivered by the Hon. Waddy Thompson, the superintendent of education for the county. About the cornerstone were gathered the teachers, the students, their parents and friends, the county officials, who were white, and all the leading white men in that vicinity, together with many of the black men and women whom the same white people but a few years before had held a title to as property. The members of both races were anxious to exercise the privilege of placing under the cornerstone some memento. Before the building was completed, we passed through some very trying seasons. More than once, our hearts were made to bleed, as it were, because bills were falling due that we did not have the money to meet. Perhaps no one who has not gone through the experience, month after month, of trying to erect buildings and provide equipment for a school when no one knew where the money was to come from, can properly appreciate the difficulties under which we labored. During the first years at Tuskegee, I recall that night after night, I would roll and toss on my bed, without sleep, because of the anxiety and uncertainty which we were in regarding money. I knew that, in a large degree, we were trying an experiment, that of testing whether or not it was possible for Negroes to build up and control the affairs of a large education institution. I knew that if we failed, it would injure the whole race. I knew that the presumption was against us. I knew that, in the case of white people beginning such an enterprise, it would be taken for granted that they were going to succeed. But in our case, I felt that people would be surprised if we succeeded. All this made a burden, which pressed down on us, sometimes it seemed, at the rate of £1,000 to the square inch. In all our difficulties and anxieties, however, I never went to a white or a black person in the town of Tuskegee for any assistance that was in their power to render, without being helped according to their means. More than a dozen times, when bills figuring up into the hundreds of dollars were falling due, I applied to the white men of Tuskegee for small loans, often borrowing small amounts from as many as a half-dozen persons to meet our obligations. One thing I was determined to do from the first, and that was to keep the credit of the school high. And this, I think I can say without boasting, we have done all through these years. I shall always remember a bit of advice given me by Mr. George W. Campbell, the white man to whom I have referred to as the one who induced General Armstrong to send me to Tuskegee. Soon after I entered upon the work, Mr. Campbell said to me, in his fatherly way, "Washington, always remember that credit is capital." At one time when we were in the greatest distress for money that we ever experienced, I placed the situation frankly before General Armstrong. Without hesitation, he gave me his personal check for all the money which he had saved for his own use. This was not the only time that General Armstrong helped Tuskegee in this way. I do not think I have ever made this fact public before. During the summer of 1882, at the end of the first year's work of the school, I was married to Miss Fanny N. Smith of Malden, W.Va. We began keeping house in Tuskegee early in the fall. This made a home for our teachers, who now had been increased to 4 in number. My wife was also a graduate of the Hampton Institute. After earnest and constant work in the interests of the school, together with her housekeeping duties, my wife passed away in May 1884. One child, Portia M. Washington, was born during our marriage. From the first, my wife most earnestly devoted her thoughts and time to the work of the school, and was completely one with me in every interest and ambition. She passed away, however, before she had an opportunity of seeing what the school was designed to be.